Gave up managing billions, become a better investor. Episode 33, Range Part 1. Hello. Yes, we're almost at the end of August. In a few days' time, I'll do a quick podcast about thoughts about recent market moves over the 8th month of the year, I guess over the first 8 months of 2023. Even more importantly, of course, thoughts about how the final 4 months of 2023 are going to progress. Because there's always this kind of an important, interesting time for investment thinkers be kind of giving a few views as people come back from holidays and related and start thinking, how am I either going to retain the profits I've made so far year to date, or perhaps more people this year thinking, how am I going to make some money over the final 4 months of 2023? So anyway, lots of things to discuss there. We'll do lots more of that probably on Saturday this week. But first I wanted to do really part one of the book Range, published by David Epstein in 2019. And it's kind of interesting. I bought the book back then and I did read it, but rereading it, as I've been doing with many books actually over recent months, I've actually got a better insight and feel for it, perhaps better than what I got sort of 3.5, 4 years ago, whenever I read it back then. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because I talk a lot in these podcasts about the importance of active investment for sort of a fundamental investor. Clearly, again, technical investors will do their own thing, and this is undoubtedly not the sort of podcast for you. But it was fascinating reading or rereading the book again and thinking just how relevant it was for the world of active investment. And, you know, a few reasons for that I'll briefly give, certainly that I read in the first half of the book. A few comments really came home, really. There was this observation about if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I laughed when I read that comment because it felt so indicative, really, of a world where people have become very obsessed, certainly in the investment world, of machines, of making decisions based on a computer system saying this is the right thing to do. And obviously, I'm linking this to the choice of passive management sort of techniques, or passive plus techniques, where there's a passive kind of central index linked choice made, and then people make small tweaks against that. When I think actually the world is becoming clearly not just an active investment world, but a much more complex world at many levels. I love the notion that the observation really that chess is 99% tactics and computers are tactically flawless. And of course it's true. You know, we all remember when computers beat chess grandmasters for the first time, and clearly the scope, the skills of, as we've seen really in recent AI and related discussions, have become more powerful and I guess sometimes more fearful for people. But, you know, generally I think, as I've talked about before in previous podcasts, the rise of ChatGPT, AI matters and related, these are not new issues. As I've talked about before, I've reread another book, which again I purchased 5-6 years ago, which was talking about AI in China back then. And frankly, we could go back a couple of decades easily and be hearing about people talking about AI and the rise of the machines. Famously, of course, a comment made in Terminator 2 back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. But anyway, there you go. So kind of interesting to read about chess, but also it just struck me again that if a machine is so good, but fortunately in a smart world, a world where there are uncertain macro or geopolitical issues, where sector and stock specifics driven by individuals, driven by small teams, driven by new revolutions, if you like, new innovations, these are tricky to predict, impossible at a certain level to predict, of course, tricky to invest correctly in as well. But that is also the scope, the skill, the opportunity for the active investor, particularly as, and you recall a line that I used in one of my first podcasts, one of the famous comments from Mr. X told me 25 odd years ago or so, that the importance was to know more than about a particular stock or an area, better than 90% of the market. And it struck me at the time, my goodness, isn't that impossible to do or so tricky to do? But actually, I think the reality is it's not as tricky as you think. It's just you need to have the right sort of approach, the right mechanism, or what actually the book Range calls, interestingly, was chunking, chunking skills, which I had to look up precisely what that meant, but essentially it's kind of drawing insights and information from a variety of sources, which of course, when I think about it, my goodness, that's sort of how I kind of behave as an investor, really, to kind of a roundabout way. As you see, everything is sort of interlinked with everything else in some strange way. But there you go. A couple of other insights from the first half of the book. I personally really like the sort of the observation that that the book made, which is that insights on having one foot outside your world was kind of, I thought, again, that is so true. You know, you've got to kind of make mistakes, accept mistakes, but that's how you learn. And unless you always want something to be laid out for you in a book, or you do it this way, that's fine. It's a good way to start and get some base insights, but actually doing it yourself is even more powerful. And as there was a musician quoted later on in the first half of the book, which said that the key is not to think about playing, just play. And I thought, yeah, of course, it's just like that with investments, really, isn't it? And in a way, even though we've become smarter, and there's no doubt that people get smarter over time, over generations, from one generation to another. But the reality is, when we're sort of in real time, matters are occurring, how you react to them, particularly in something like investments, where stock markets, financial markets can go up or down, quite a lot over a short time period. It's all about trying to think not what the headlines are saying, but what's already been factored in, and how are you thinking about the future, and consequent what's going to be important. And these are sort of matters which, for one, for better or for worse, I feel comfortable with talking about and thinking that way, sort of being what appears to be the fool who's doing something different today, but actually over time, over the following months, maybe even longer, becomes closer to the truth and actually goes from a situation which is undervalued to being fairly valued, or of course being horribly overvalued, selling out of that and moving on whilst others are crying for more at just the wrong time, which is often the way it is with active investment after all. As I say, no better than 90% of the market is not as tricky as you think, particularly if you've got that kind of flexible mindset to it. I believe, in any case. Anyway, a couple of other quotes from the book that I really enjoyed. Certainly in the first half, there was the mention of a problem well put is half solved. And I thought to myself, wow, absolutely, again, something which, I don't know, I sort of feel inherently, or perhaps through a bit of experience or time or mistakes or everything else, as kind of, I can see the resonance, the correctness in that, really. And that's the thing about investments, trying to talk about it, write down some notes, note down some of your observations, cautions, remaining questions, great insights, and the like. That's what matters. These matter, hugely. And then before I, right towards the end of the first half of the book, there was the sort of the kind of mention that test and learn, not plan and implement. And the thing is, it's better to test stuff, and you learn from that. This is back again to kind of that notion of trying to you learn by actually doing it, and sometimes making the mistake. And that first investment is a disaster, but it doesn't mean you should stop investing. Similarly, if that first investment was a huge success, you shouldn't say, well, this is easy then, isn't it? I'm going to make gazillions from this measure, because we all know that is not what the world of investment is like, as frankly few things in life are. And so I think the plan and implement kind of notion is this sort of thought again that you read. It's an ironic thing to be saying, really, when I'm reading a book commenting on kind of some of the problems with just reading a book. But in a way, I guess what the book Range is trying to sort of identify or make people think about is that just reading a textbook, the doing a course or something alone is not going to be enough. It's all about getting your hands dirty, doing something, making mistakes, and learning from that, getting better. So actually, I guess you could say not many super new angles or arguments or anything like that. But again, quite often, as it is quite often with great books, they just make you slightly rethink matters or think, actually, what I am doing just needs to be tweaked a bit, but is essentially correct. And certainly my kind of constant mentions of the importance of active management, of getting your hands dirty and doing research and everything else, reiterated by this book. I guess why I like the book, after all, there is a bit of bias in there, I guess natural internal bias in there at the same time. But anyway, if you're looking for a sort of a late summer, early autumn read, have to say the first half of rereading Range was very insightful. I really enjoyed it, and at some point over the next week or two, I'd have finished reading the second half as well, and I'll come back with a few extra targets and insights from that then. But as I say, that's will be occurring at some point in the early part of September. But the next podcast, which will be out over the weekend, probably Saturday, as I speak, we'll talk about how August ended and prospects, even more importantly, for September, October, November, December, the last 4 months of the year. Bit of a review of how both equity, bond, alternative and related markets have been moving. But as I say, more importantly, where things are going from here, because let's face it, as I've said many times, nothing exists in a vacuum. You've got to get your macro, your geopolitical thoughts in place and then merge them into your sector and stock views. And I'm afraid that kind of burden of lots of work and research and everything else, it never stops. But that's what makes investments interesting, in my opinion. Anyway, hopefully that was of interest. If I reminded you of a book that you've always wanted to read or perhaps did read a few years ago, then I guess I've achieved something here. But yeah, if you haven't read it already, good tip from me, actually. And I have enjoyed rereading it again. So we'll come back with part 2 in a week or two's time. Anyhow, thanks a lot for listening. We'll come back with a bit more conventional investment stuff in a few days' time. Thanks for listening again, and speak to you soon. Bye-bye.